Hello, everyone, and welcome to Firstpost America. We're coming to you live from the nation's capital in Washington, D.C. And over the next few minutes, we'll take you from the United States and around the world, covering all the top stories of the day. But before that, here's a look at the latest headlines. A blast in southern Russia's Stavropol kills a retired Russian commander who led airstrikes on Ukraine's port city of Mariupol. Authorities are, in fact, investigating Ukraine's possible involvement in the explosion. A Navy maritime plane crashes during training near Pyongyang City in South Korea, killing all 4 on board. The cause of the crash is still being investigated. The Philippines warns China against interfering in its South China Sea operations, rejecting Beijing's claims over the Spratly Islands after a recent naval standoff in contested waters. A deluge of ice, mud, and rocks largely destroyed the village of Blatten in Switzerland as massive glacier collapses in the Swiss Alps, leaving 1 person missing. And oil prices rise nearly $1 a barrel after a U.S. court blocked President Donald Trump's tariffs. This comes as traders await possible new U.S. sanctions on Russian crude and an OPEC decision on hiking output in July. We begin in Washington, where Elon Musk has officially announced that he will be ending his role in the Trump administration, stepping down as head of the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE. His departure marks the conclusion of a turbulent tenure defined by sweeping federal job cuts, internal clashes, and growing criticism of President Donald Trump's economic policies. Elon Musk, who stepped away from his sprawling business empire, had been serving as a special government employee, which allowed him to work up to 130 days per year in federal service. And even though his exit was expected to coincide with the end of that limit, it was accelerated following his recent public criticism of President Trump's controversial budget proposal.
And I'm not someone who's ever committed violence, and yet massive violence was committed against my companies. Massive violence was threatened against me. Who are these people? Why would they do that? How wrong can they be? They're on the wrong side of history, and that's an evil thing to do.
Now, launched in January, DOGE quickly became one of Donald Trump's most aggressive issues and departments. This unofficial agency slashed an estimated 260,000 federal jobs out of the 2.3 million civilian positions. Now, while some layoffs were in fact blocked by federal judges, some, like those from the U.S. nuclear program, were mistakenly dismissed amid all the chaos.
Do you guys feel like you're putting yourself at risk by doing this because you're stirring up so much hostility by these people ripping us off?
100%. Well, we don't need to speculate about that. You can see online in the protests that they make that very clear. I mean, I've been hanged in effigy many times, and there have been people that have actively advocated at these violent protests for my death, and have also advocated for the death of the people at DOGE.
And now Musk had initially promised to trim $2 trillion from federal spending, but revised that target way down to $150 billion over time. He recruited what he described as a super high IQ small government revolutionary team, demanding over 80 hours of work per week on government cost-cutting projects. However, despite its ambitious goal, DOGE soon attracted backlash all across Washington.
Make billionaire space Nazis fictional again, because the real ones are unfortunately in charge of firing government employees that don't deserve it and government employees that we need in order to keep our government functional for everyone, not just for billionaires.
However, Elon Musk's frustration became evident in April when he said Doge had turned into a whipping boy for broader administration discontent. He also expressed disappointment with President Trump's latest budget bill, calling it fiscally irresponsible.
I think a bill can be big or it could be beautiful, but I don't know if it could be both. I'm not happy about certain aspects of it, but I'm thrilled by other aspects of it. We're going to see what happens. It's got a way to go.
Now, the fallout to Musk's efforts were not limited to just politics. In fact, Tesla experienced a 13% drop in deliveries in early 2025, the worst in its history. Its stock also plunged by as much as 45%, and although it partially recovered, share prices remained down 10% overall. Activists from around the world targeted Tesla, staging protests, boycotts, and even acts of arson at its dealerships and charging stations.
Europe is our weakest market. We're strong everywhere else. Now our sales are doing well at this point. We don't anticipate any meaningful sales shortfall.
But despite the turmoil, Elon Musk recently reiterated his commitment to lead Tesla for the next 5 years and hinted at stepping away from politics. He also said he'd scale back political donations, having already spent nearly $300 million backing President Donald Trump and other Republicans in the 2024 election.
If I see a reason to do political spending in the future, I will do it. I do not currently see a reason.
And while the White House began formally offboarding President Donald Trump's first buddy on Wednesday, it remains unclear what's next for the billionaire tech mogul or whether his split with the president is actually permanent. And continuing in the United States, Chinese students now find themselves at the center of a political firestorm as the Trump administration escalates its hardline immigration agenda by targeting international education. In a bold move, Secretary of State Marco Rubio announced that the United States will, quote unquote, aggressively revoke visas of Chinese nationals, especially those linked to the Chinese Communist Party or studying in critical fields like science and technology.
Under President Trump's leadership, the U.S. State Department will work with the Department of Homeland Security to aggressively revoke visas for Chinese students, including those with connections to the Chinese Communist Party or studying in critical fields. We will also revise visa criteria to enhance scrutiny of all future visa applications from the People's Republic of China and Hong Kong.
This development comes not just amid simmering diplomatic tensions, but in the thick of a trade war between the world's two largest economies. President Trump's tariffs and Beijing's countermeasures have already roiled global markets and disrupted supply chains. And now the battlefield has expanded from economication. Backed by the State Department and the Department of Homeland Security, halts all new student and exchange visa appointments worldwide. It also expands vetting measures, including enhanced scrutiny of social media accounts. And even though the freeze doesn't cancel existing appointments, it does, in fact, mark a significant disruption to the flow of foreign students, especially from China.
Because of this, I immediately canceled the ticket back to China, which made me very sad. I have a lot of arrangements after my return, and I have an internship at the domestic branch of the Clinton Health Access Initiative. Now I have been forced to rearrange a lot of things, and I have suffered a lot of loss in my academic and personal gains.
Now, according to official data, there were approximately 277,000 Chinese students in the U.S. during the 2023-2024 academic year. And for decades, these students formed a vital pipeline of talent for U.S. research institutions and technology firms, contributing more than $50 billion to the economy. But numbers have fallen sharply since 2019, driven by pandemic-era restrictions, intensifying scrutiny, and rising anti-China sentiment.
Trump administration's imposition of a ban on Harvard accepting and keeping overseas students is absolutely enormous attack, both on Harvard and on academic independence and integrity. It means nearly a third of Harvard's students would suddenly face the question of whether they would be able to stay on at Harvard. And of course, the impact on Harvard's finance would be pretty devastating.
Now, in response to the efforts, the Chinese government yesterday called on Washington to safeguard the rights of its students, but has not formally responded to the specific visa revocations.
Educational cooperation between China and the United States is mutually beneficial. China has always opposed the politicization of educational cooperation. This approach from the United States will only damage the image and international credibility of the United States. China will firmly safeguard the legitimate rights and interests of overseas Chinese students and scholars.
So for now, students remain caught in the crossfire, unsure whether to wait or retreat. And as embassy appointments vanish and legal battles heat up, chilling reality sets in that America's war with China has found a new front, and it's inside the classroom. And now moving to the Middle East, tensions are once again escalating as Israel launched a fresh round of airstrikes on Yemen's Sanaa International Airport. Israeli officials confirmed that the strikes destroyed the last remaining aircraft operated by the Houthis, marking a significant escalation in the ongoing regional conflict.
اليوم 28 مايو العدو الصهيوني يستهدف الطائرة الوحيدة 28 مايو 2025 هذه الطائرة الوحيدة الناجية استهدفها العدو الصهيوني ودمرها بشكل كامل.
The airline operating the plane condemned the strike, saying in a statement the aircraft was scheduled to transport passengers to Saudi Arabia for the annual Muslim Hajj pilgrimage.
Another Yemenia Airlines plane was directly and cowardly targeted this morning, just moments before the scheduled boarding of pilgrims. The plane had received all necessary permits for landing, operation, and takeoff from all relevant authorities.
The general director of the airport said the operations, which had only recently reopened following previous Israeli airstrikes, have once again been rendered inoperative.
Accordingly, we announced to the Yemeni and international public opinion the complete suspension of Yemenia Airlines flights from Sanaa International Airport until further notice.
Sanaa International Airport, the largest in Yemen, was also being used by the UN humanitarian flights. The runway had been restored just last week after earlier attacks destroyed 3 other Yemeni aircraft. And now, with the latest assault, all functioning civilian planes at the airport have been wiped out. Israel's Defense Minister Israel Katz stated that the strike was a continuation of the country's firm policy, which stated, and I quote, "Whoever fires at the state of Israel will pay a heavy price," end quote. He emphasized that the Israeli Air Force had specifically targeted terrorist infrastructure and was working to impose a form of aerial and naval blockade on the Houthis. Now, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu also echoed the stance, warning, quote, "Any harm directed at Israel will be met with greater force."
I have said more than once, the Houthis are only the symptom. The main driving force behind them is Iran, which is responsible for the aggression emanating from Yemen.
The Houthis, an Iranian-backed faction that controls territory where around 60% of Yemen's population resides, have been repeatedly launching drones and ballistic missiles at Israel since the Gaza conflict began back in October of 2023. And although most of these attacks have been intercepted or have fallen short, they've disrupted civilian life and aviation in Israel. A notable incident earlier this month nearly struck Ben Gurion Airport, prompting many international airlines to suspend flights to the country. Now, amid escalation, the Houthi leader defended the missile launches, stating they were acts of solidarity with Palestinians suffering in Gaza. He accused Israel of targeting civilian infrastructure to pressure the group into halting its stance.
No matter the scale of the Israeli aggression or how often it is repeated, it will never affect our people's position in supporting the Palestinian people, because this is a religious, moral, and humanitarian duty that cannot be compromised.
In fact, since July of 2024, the Israel Defense Forces have carried out approximately 10 strikes against Houthi targets, including ports and electrical infrastructure. Initially, the United States had taken the lead in retaliating against Houthi attacks, but following a ceasefire agreement with the group earlier this year, Washington has scaled back its involvement, leaving Israel to handle the threat on its own.
Today, the great Yemeni people came out joyful at this great victory. This victory which every Yemeni has earned, every honorable Yemeni. Today, with thanks to God, we have subdued the US and subdued Israel.
So now, with no civilian aircraft left at Yemen's main airport and threats of a Houthi naval blockade on Haifa still looming, one can't help but wonder, how far will this cycle of retaliation go? And in Bolivia, where protests by supporters of former President Evo Morales are now intensifying. Clashes broke out in the city of La Paz as police fired rubber bullets at hundreds of protesters who responded by throwing firecrackers, rocks, and tires. The protesters are demanding Morales run for office again in August this year, despite a ban on serving more than 2 years. Morales has challenged his exclusion while his supporters continue to organize marches and traffic stoppages. Now, this has also widened his rift with ally-turned-rival and the current president, Luis Aker, who has left the ruling Socialist MAS party divided. Well, a fractured left and a crisis-ridden Bolivia paved the way for the return of the right. Here's the story with more.
Shots ringing out in broad daylight, streets covered with smoke, and a violent face-off. Bolivia's city of La Paz was on the boil as police in riot gear clashed with supporters of former President Evo Morales. The police shot rubber bullets and tear gas at hundreds of protesters who responded by throwing firecrackers, tires, and even rocks.
If there are injuries or deaths, the Palace of Justice will burn, the government palace will burn. We don't want repression, we want our rights to be respected.
Their demand? Morales be allowed to run as presidential candidate in the August election.
Evo Morales is on each and every one of us. If they want to detain Evo Morales, they would need to take everyone else too. I don't think that the government prisons would be enough.
Where have this traitor government left us? This is why we want to support Evo Morales in the ballot as our representative. He is the only one because he is a revolutionary leader, not an imposed one.
Morales, who ruled the country from 2006 to 2019 and was Bolivia's first indigenous president, was blocked from contesting elections by a constitutional court earlier this month. The Bolivian constitution does not allow an individual to serve more than 2 presidential terms, and Morales has already served 3. He's also wanted on charges of trafficking a minor. In 2019, he resigned under pressure from the military and went into exile. Morales returned to the country a year later and backed Luis Arce, the current president. The two, however, soon turned rivals. The Constitutional Court's decision has not just intensified protests in recent weeks, but has also fractured the ruling MAS party. Supporters of Morales call the court verdict a judicial plot by President Luis Arce. Earlier this month, facing prospects of a humiliating defeat in the August election, President Luis Arce, who was expected to seek a second term, withdrew from the race. His announcement also came as the rift within the governing party widens, as both Arce and Morales struggle for control of the socialist bloc.
I say today to the Bolivian people of my absolute conviction of my decision to decline candidacy to seek presidential re-election next August. I also take this opportunity to defy former President Evo Morales and tell him not to insist on his intention to be a presidential candidate. First, because constitutionally he cannot do so, and second, because it will disperse and fragment the vote, favoring the right wing.
Giving up on his own candidacy, Arce called on Morales to do the same, in an attempt to unify the party.
We have already made our contribution to unity. Now is your turn, brothers and sisters, organizations, unions, to all the population, to consolidate this unity for benefit of the Bolivian people.
Morales, however, refused. He said Arce was in no position to make such a demand, and that he won't quit the race and will challenge his exclusion.
Yesterday, the president resigned his candidacy. He is asking for unity, asking for Evo Morales to resign. Why does he have to ask that I resign my candidacy?
Another key leftist challenger, Andronico Rodriguez, the young Senate president who hails from Morales' rural cocoa-growing bastion, has also been disqualified by an electoral tribunal. The years-long Arce-Morales rivalry has been accelerating the economic crisis in Bolivia. It has triggered anger among the working-class voters. From an exporter of natural gas, Bolivia has become an importer of fuel. From boasting of one of the region's lowest inflation rates to battling one of the highest now. The crisis in Bolivia is worsening by the day, with shortages paralyzing the country. So amid turmoil, will a fractured left pave way for the return of the right in Bolivia?
And we end today in Canada. Smoke, flames, and fear. That's the reality tonight for thousands of Canadians as wildfires rage across Manitoba and Alberta. In fact, more than 17,000 people have been forced to flee their homes as blazes tear through forests and communities. And what officials are calling one of the largest evacuations in its history. In fact, entire towns are being emptied, military planes are being deployed, and families are packing up with no idea when or even if they'll return home. We take you to the Great White North with more on this devastating story.
Another 200-300 feet north, it would have burned the whole place.
Canada is once again in the grip of a ferocious wildfire season. And this year, Manitoba is bearing the brunt of the fury. The province has declared a state of emergency and has ordered evacuations of more than 17,000 residents from its northern and eastern regions. This is the largest evacuation Manitoba will have seen in most people's living memory, said Premier Wab Kineau in a solemn news conference. He further added, it will require significant resources and cooperation from all levels of government.
We will get through this difficult period, and we'll get through this trying period the way that we always do, by working together.
The situation escalated so rapidly that authorities requested military assistance, including aircraft, to help with evacuations and firefighting efforts. Community centers and soccer fields in Winnipeg and other cities are now being prepared to house the displaced as people scramble to flee with children and pets. Residents fleeing the fires painted a harrowing picture of life on the fire line. Some said that the flames were shooting over 121 feet. Firefighters couldn't even get close enough to do anything. One resident said, and I quote, "This is definitely nerve-wracking. The only highway out was jammed and the petrol stations had already run out of gas." The fires have already scorched nearly 200,000 hectares of forest in Manitoba this month alone, 3 times the annual average over the last 5 years. Officials say that 22 fires are currently burning and conditions are growing worse due to prolonged periods of warmth and dryness. Meanwhile, in neighboring Alberta, wildfires are also raging and have prompted evacuations and industrial shutdowns. Wildfires near Chipewyan Lake have already covered nearly 2,900 hectares. Residents were put on a 1-hour evacuation alert as shifting winds raised fears of sudden danger. There are 134 wildfires active across the country in provinces including British Columbia, Saskatchewan, Ontario, and Alberta. Half of them are out of control. The destruction has already claimed lives. Earlier this month, 2 people in Lac du Bonnet died after being trapped by a fast-moving blaze. In 2023, Canada's worst wildfire season on record, the only recorded fatalities were among firefighters. Communities across Manitoba, including Lynn Lake, Marcel Colomb First Nation, and Pelican Narrows in Saskatchewan, have seen more than 5,000 residents evacuated in recent days. As Canada stares down another potentially record-breaking wildfire season, experts warn that these crises may become the new normal. For thousands of Canadians who are now on the move, the wildfire crisis isn't just a headline, it's their reality. And as flames threaten communities from coast to coast, the country faces a stark reminder. Adaptation is no longer a choice, but a necessity.
That's our show for today. We certainly thank all of you for tuning in. We hope to see you right back here again tomorrow, everyone. Thanks again for watching.